Thank you for coming. You're my favorite students. Don't tell the others. Today I'm going to show you three things that I added, small things that I added to the website that you may find useful for the assignment of this week, you in notes on a man and a woman, and for the final paper later on. Then I'm going to go back to the style and the core idea in a man and a woman. However, I've decided not to continue with the selection of frames that I put together because I'm afraid that you might not be able to see what I'm trying to guide you to see in the film. Therefore, I'll have a short introduction and then I'll show you a series of short scenes, because once you see those elements, stylistic and thematic elements, you cannot unsee them, and therefore you're able to understand this film, which in terms of aesthetics or sensibility may feel obsolete, old-fashioned, but the core idea is still valid, and the realization is good from an artistic point of view, whether or not one likes the movie as someone in 2023 who watches it. Okay? I will introduce briefly the third choice for the final paper. The third film that you can choose is Nomadland from 2020, a film that won 3 Oscars, Best Picture, Best Director for Chloe Zhao, and Best Actress for Frances McDormand. If there is time at the end of the class, I'll show you a clip from that film. So when you visit this page called that I changed the title to Frames from a Man and a Woman, Themes and Visual Styles, you find 2 things that may be useful to you. It's up to you to use them or not. One, I did a map with layers, as I did for The Hitchhiker, with the 10 or 11 locations in the story of the film in various places. And of course, mostly the film happens between Deauville and Paris, and in both locations there are several places, so you can, this is an interactive map, so you can zoom in, and if you do, you can see where those locations are. And if you click on any of these locations, then this time I added also pictures from the film, and you can click on them and see the scenes that happen in that location. And of course, you find a brief text for each one of them. The next section is probably more useful. I've tried to schematize the film's story through the various car rides and the various moments. So you find in here the locations and the time. The film starts in Deauville, and it's a Sunday in December of 1965 or January of 1966, and you find briefly a reference to everything that happens at that point. Then you find the first car ride, the first transfer from Deauville to Paris. Anne and Jean-Louis are driving together. It's the night of the first Sunday. And during the car ride, as it happens multiple times in this film, there are stories, there are episodes that I call video stories, because for the most part, these stories are told just or mostly through images, right? So in this case, you have 2 video stories, one showing Anne and Pierre working together, showing Pierre's job as an actor and a stuntman, another video story showing Anne and Pierre working on the set, And there is then a long video story which epitomizes the kind of romantic love that Anne and Pierre had, etc. And I've repeated that through the rest of the film. So it gives you a good idea of the structure of the film. Third thing I added, when you go to the page entitled Films for the Final Paper, and links are everywhere to that page, you find for Nomadland the frames. So I've gotten frames at 2 seconds interval for the film because this is your guide. If you choose this to analyze, then you cannot just see the movie. You have to study the frames in order to understand what is in a scene. How is the scene organized? What is the sequence of camera angle? What is the editing in a scene, etc. And the frames include lines, so most of the lines are there, unless there is a line in between frames during those 2 seconds intervals, but for the most part the lines are there through the subtitles. As usual, I've added a series of links to reviews and articles, and being a film that won 3 Oscars, you find not only plenty of reviews and some articles about the situations, the issues that are represented in the film, but you find in here a selection of the most important articles from, for example, the New York Times, the New Yorker, Time, Esquire, The Atlantic, CNN, plus a few more. Even in this case, evidently it's now customary, I hadn't realized, but I should have thought of that. Even in this case, they have an official Instagram channel, and you find the link in here. So, before we watch the first scene from A Man and a Woman, the 1966 film, let me go back to the main theme. Because in order to understand correctly the aesthetics and the plan behind the structure of the story, the way the characters are treated, you have to understand that the film visually is based, and from the point of view of acting as well, is based on the contrast. It's an intentional contrast between reality and what we could call memories. The reality is the prosaic lives of Anne and Jean-Louis. It is true that Anne works on a movie set, but she is a strip girl. She's a staff. She's not a creative member of the production crew. And it is true that Jean-Louis works as a car tester and race car driver, but his work, as we will see during the actual testing at the racetrack south of Paris, where he goes to try the Ford GT40, the Ford Mustang, and another open-wheel car, his work is not that romantic. It's pretty much technical, what you would expect from someone who has that kind of role. And even for the race where he participates, the Monte Carlo Rally of 1966, although it was and still is a very prestigious race, he doesn't win. He doesn't even place in the top 5. He gets to the end, right? So you find the reality of these two people who have lost their spouses, have each their kid in a boarding school, contrasted with the fancy, cinematic, hyper-romanticized memories of their past lives with their partners. And of course, those memories are first of all infused with nostalgia and possibly even regret, right? For someone like Jean-Louis, who lost his wife because she committed suicide, but they're pretty much informed by a very romantic view of a love story, but that romantic view, the language of that romantic view, once we put it on the film, is the language of films itself, which is the beginning of a very postmodern sensitivity or sensibility. You pick the term that fits in English. I'm not able to right now. It is the beginning of an aesthetics that we are very familiar with. That is to say, when we think of what would be the ideal love life for each one of us, our dreams, our visions are probably made of music, songs, lyrics of songs, videos of those books, novels, short stories, right? So our mind revolves around the media consumption that is constantly bombarding us with material that ends up becoming the actual plans for our lives. Not that our lives are like films, but when we think about a perfect life, then probably our dreams, our imagination looks a lot like a film. And if I had time, I would love to hear if you ever had an actual film moment in your romantic life. If you ever experienced something that you felt was like a film, exactly like a film. Something you did for the other person or something the other person did for you. But think, for example, about something as simple as the proposal. The proposal has turned now into a movie production, right? So it's a surprise thing, but you probably have, in 50% or more of the cases on Long Island, a photographer or a friend hidden somewhere shooting that. Last year, I went to the Brooklyn Bridge, the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge in Brooklyn, and on top of the small hill on the river, there was a proposal going on, and there was someone shooting from 20 yards away, right? So maybe she didn't realize that, but everything was prepared like a set. And again, when you think of the proposal, whoever does the proposal will script it in their minds, right? What am I going to do? How am I going to mask the fact that this is the event, the occasion for the proposal? When am I going to break and bring the proposal up? What is the first thing I'll do or the first thing I'll say? When is it that I will kneel in front of her if I'm a man? Etc. Right? And now, you think this is normal, but it's not exactly what people have done forever and ever. It's just that we live in a society where the media content, entertainment, has become a huge component of our lives. So in this case is life that translates into film. Because clearly, whatever you see about Pierre, whatever you see about Valerie, is too much for any one of us. No one can be like them. And therefore, no one can compete with this romantic view of a partner who has died and therefore cannot do anything wrong anymore. But the reality of Jean-Louis and Anne is pretty different. They're low-key. And when you look at the acting, when it comes to the memories, the acting is very emphatic. Dramatic for Valerie, emphatic in an exaggerated way for Pierre, according to the aesthetics that Susan Sontag defined as camp at the beginning of the 1960s. When you look at the acting in real life by Jean-Louis and Anne, it's very naturalistic. So think of the lunch with the kids and other scenes I'll show you. It feels like they're not even acting. Very neutral with some nice moments, and of course, they're great actors, especially Anouk and May. And then these people who are falling in love who are regular people like everyone in real life. At some point, these people, moved, driven by their desires, they think of two romantic gestures. Gestures that you would only find in films. For her, the romantic gesture that would be found in a film is to change the telegram. She's watching TV, she sees him in Monte Carlo being interviewed at the end of the Monte Carlo race, and she picks up the phone, calls in the telegram office to send a telegram, and dictates a simple telegram that starts with bravo, etc., and a few other forgettable things. Then she stops, and she thinks of this very grandiose romantic gesture. She confides to a telegram her love, her feelings for him, and changes the telegram to bravo, I love you. Right? Who does this, right? In real life. And he responds in two, right? He thinks, I've received this telegram. A woman like her has confessed her love to me, so I have to do something to match. And the romantic gesture on his part is leave the banquet and take a race car and drive 1,000 kilometers, literally 1,000 kilometers from Monte Carlo to Paris through the night to show up unexpected at 6:45, 6:30 a.m. in her apartment and say, here I am. You would never imagine that I would respond like this. And it is such an example of life trying to imitate film that while he's driving, he's scripting the event of their encounter in his life, in his mind, saying, what will I say to the door woman? What will I say to her? Should I wait or should I knock at the door right away? Right? He's trying to make even their encounter into a movie moment. And then, of course, disappointment, because real life is not like the film, she's not there. And he has to drive another 200 miles or something like that to Deauville from Paris to find her, and he finds her on the beach with both of the kids, and they hug, and that looks like a movie moment. But the next scene, when they're making love in the hotel, and all of a sudden she's out of it, and he realizes, and he said, why? And she said, because of my husband, and they separate again. This is real life coming back. Because real life is not smooth, is not without hurdles, without issues, without difficulties. So the beauty of the sex scene is that reality, the memories can intrude into real life, but reality cannot be like a film for a long time. And then you have the final grandiose gesture where she takes the train, goes back to Paris, and he decides to race the car, beat the train to Paris, and he's there to wait for her. And again they hug, which is a very cinematic moment, but you don't know anything about the characters. And when you see the sequel, A Man and a Woman 20 years later, you learn that it didn't last. That romantic life, that romantic love they had, which was so grandiose, made of these grandiose gestures, cannot be sustained. And they separated again. And in the film, A Man and a Woman 20 years later, again, they go back together at the end of the film, but it's not that simple. So the purpose of the scenes I want to show you, what I want you to notice in those scenes, is the contrast between acting and other visual elements in some of the scenes about the story that the two characters are having, the story that is developing between them, and the very different, more media-like, cinema-like representation of their spouses So those are the ideals, the cinematic ideals they feel they have to compete with. They feel that they're not true to their emotions unless they act like film heroes, heroes in a film story. So the first scene is during the first car ride. So first time they've met, they're driving back, they're two strangers, they're driving back to Paris together. They have to spend something like 3 hours or 4 hours together. And so there are plenty of awkward silences, but the silences are not awkward. Actually, there is some sympathy developing. There is a connection. They're smiling, they're looking at each other, and especially she is very good at communicating with her face, communicating a lot of nuances, a lot of subtle emotions. And notice then, I've saved for you just the last 30 or 40 seconds of this, the segment in the car, in black and white. And notice how this changes when we go into the story of the incredibly romantic love that she enjoyed in the company of Pierre. And it is really like the video of a song, right? Does it mean that this is real life? No, because otherwise you say, well, this film was absurd, I don't like this film, etc. No, this is what the memory is telling her. This is how her story with Pierre has been revised and rewritten in her mind. Because this is what we do, right? When we think about grandparents or parents we lost, friends we lost, people we loved in general, romantically or otherwise, right? When we think of them, we don't think of trivial details, right? We think about the best moments. We think about the moments that make us cry or laugh, smile, etc. Okay, so this is the basis for the film. The contrast between reality and romantic memories that are made of film material and the impossibility of connecting these two. The impossibility of reality to be like a film forever. So. They're just listening to a song, and again, she's smiling but not saying much. It's a great scene, great acting. Imagine they're driving together for about 4 hours. He says, "Are you married?" And that's where the story of Pierre. He says, but he's not married.
Et comment s'est fait que nous sommes mariés? Que fait donc votre mari?
And this is the beginning of the hyper-romantic representation of her husband, right? As an actor and then as a stuntman. And again, the idea is, who can compete with that? Even if you're a race car driver, you're not that romantic in real life.
Si j'ai bien compris, il est acteur.
And we know it's a commercial, not a film.
Il n'est pas seulement acteur.
You see Levi's. So even driving car is more of a hero than a race car driver.
Dites-moi, comment fait-on la connaissance d'un cascadeur? Au fond d'un ravin?
And it's making fun of it.
Au Texas?
Right? Meaning, this is out of this world. This is not real. It cannot be real. Because we, real people, normal people, we never meet a stuntman, right? And this is their romantic life on the set. They're on the set, but it's like they are the subject of the film. very far-fetched, right? You see him running with a coffin, but it's intentionally far-fetched. Has to be look fake, because this is the problem with ourselves. We have ideals that are too fake and fictional to become reality. Look at the use of the light in here. And then we go back to the normal life.
Ah, mais je ne prétends pas être original.
And he's saying, well, this is some kind of film.
Ce sont des choses qui arrivent à beaucoup de gens. Peut-être original, c'est être quand même.
Et votre mari est original.
And through the dialogue, you understand that she's romanticizing her memories.
Passionnant, si exclusif, si entier. Ah, il se passionne pour des choses, pour des gens, pour des idées, pour des pays.
Is that the description of a real person?
Pour moi, peut-être. Par exemple, j'ai vécu une semaine au Brésil sans jamais y avoir
And the
été.
culmination of
Et à
this
tourner un film là-bas.
dynamics between reality and
À
dreams,
son retour,
memories,
il m'a parlé de la samba pendant une semaine.
is this
La
video
samba
story,
est entrée dans notre vie.
La samba était entrée dans votre vie.
right? Over the top, intentionally over the top. So over the top that no one can be like that. So, singing a Brazilian samba with French words. Doing things that used to be common in commercials during the 1960s and 70s. And again, look at how she's dressed. I already indicated that.
Faire une samba sans tristesse, c'est aimer une femme qui ne serait que belle. Ce sont les propres paroles de Vinicius de Moraes.
But this is not their life. This is the representation of their life in her memory.
Moi qui suis peut-être
Fighting the bulls,
j'aimerais vous parler de mon amour de la samba. Comme
in
un
Samari-sur-la-Mer,
en parlerai à tous ceux qui me rencontrent.
and she's there in a white horse.
J'en connais que la chanson, un comme mode d'autres pour qui ce n'est rien qu'une mode d'autres qui en
He's
profitent.
feeding her,
Sans l'aimer,
and even now, all these things are the material of romantic dreams, the cheap romantic dreams.
j'ai parcouru le monde en cherchant ses racines.
She's washing the dishes, he's singing. They're both riding white horses in La Camargue, this natural park in southern France, natural marshes.
Joint Gilbert, carrosserie, Dorival Caymmi, Antonio Carrosserie, Vinicius de Moraes, Baden Powell, qui a fait la musique de cette chanson.
And it goes on, but you get
Vous avez mon sel.
what I was saying. The contrast between the normal reality of the car ride and the imagination of her past life with Pierre. Let's look at something else, but
Dolores Durand,
I have my notes. Without the light, I cannot see the notes.
et tous
Let's
ceux qui
look
viennent
at
de l'aube. Et mes amis qui sont avec moi ce soir. Magali, bien sûr, Nico, Osvaldo, Luigi, Oscar.
Okay, so let's look at real life. Again, he's a race car driver, so you can imagine that he could be good as a romantic hero, but then you see him actually testing race cars on a racetrack, and it's really a long, boring kind of work, a lot of attention paid to details, numbers, the times, the technical details of the cars. So think of the contrast. Yes, this is in color, but is he, Jean-Louis, being represented as a hero simply because he drives a car? Not really. There are some pretty boring, plain moments in here. We'll watch a couple of minutes from this.
Conférence de presse au sujet de ce orientation. Maintenant, nous avons passé au chapitre des sports. Comme vous savez, ce chapitre de
Right, they're filling the tank,
départ du rallye Monte Carlo 35e.
changing wheels,
Qui, dans 8 jours, démarrera. On met le point, bien sûr, un peu partout.
and you have this boring background voice of the announcer talking about the radio news, talking about the rally of Monte Carlo.
Et sur liesse de le tirage,
Again,
ainsi que
they're driving in long hours because the cars have to be driven through the night,
équipage, nous savons que depuis une semaine,
both at Le Mans and Monte Carlo.
les derniers modèles.
So, nothing romantic, really, right? Talking to mechanics, working on the engines, even has glasses on, which kills the romantic role, the romanticism in his role. And driving, putting in laps, right? Which is the reality of many drivers. Just him, just looking, just watching the cars go by, keeping track of the time, keeping track of the RPM, the engine rotations per minute.
43,4. Oui. Tu prends combien de tours?
How many revs?
11 000.
11,000. And then asking again, the time, the revs, nothing heroic, nothing romantic.
43,7. 43,7.
Right? It's not the kind of man you can fall in love with, like Pierre, who was doing these dramatic stunts or acting in those scenes. Okay? That's enough for this part. Again, sorry, but I have to have the light to see the next. So, look at the scene of the lunch. And this is a beautiful scene where the actors are, for the most part, improvising, especially the kids. They just kept the camera going and then edited the best moment. But improvisation and the low-key acting by them, by Anouk Aimée and by Jean-Louis Trintignant, emphasizes this contrast between the normal level of reality and the cinematic level of dreams and memories that we'll see later. So let's watch just a couple of minutes from the lunch.
J'aime beaucoup, je vais très souvent au cinéma. Il y a des tas de questions que je voudrais vous poser.
C'est très très bien.
The only thing is that he has a hand
Je connais votre nom,
touching her shoulder,
je connais revue de cinéma, je connais comme ça.
and look at how beautifully she's acting.
C'est pas que je fais du cinéma depuis tellement longtemps que j'ai pas tellement travaillé avec les anciens.
So even she's saying, I've been working in films, but I'm not such an incredible person because of that. You cannot script these moments. This is just the kids, right?
Big one, non. Vous avez bien mangé? Vous avez bien mangé? Tout à fait, s'il vous plaît. Tais-toi, Antoine. Tais-toi, Antoine. Tais-toi, Antoine. Antoine.
He has to say to the kid, enough. Because the kid is not following lines,
Vous voulez
right?
faire une promenade en bateau? Antoine. En bateau? Oui. Je te l'avais promis? Oui. Tu te souviens que je te l'avais promis? Oui. Et tu as été sage? Tu as été sage toute la semaine, tu me le jures? Il a été très sage? Et toi, tu as été très sage aussi?
And the most boring things of all, right? Have you been good? It's intentional, right? And they go on this ride. Okay, great example of normal life included in this. And let's go now to the story, the very film-like, the very Hollywood-like story of how Valerie, Jean-Louis' wife, died. And it starts in the car as a story that is being told while they're driving back to Paris. And again, notice the contrast between the normal style of the first part of the sequence and the hyper-romantic style of the story of his wife's death. Small details. He's driving, hands on the steering wheel, then he touches her hand. The small gestures that make up a love story, right? Very normally touches her hand, and she's touched. She reacts. No need for lines when you have an actress like her. But then before she embarks, she commits to this love story. She has to know about Valerie, and she asks him to tell the story.
Tu ne m'as jamais parlé d'autre femme.
Can she compete with the memory of his wife? Can she give him what his wife gave him? And again, the answer is no, because the story is so over the top.
Dis, tu sais, je vais être avec toi.
This is Valerie.
Tout le temps, chaque seconde, jusqu'au bout.
Look at the lines. And he's at the race, the 24-hour of Le Mans.
Rentrez de regagner vos emplacements de départ. Décolore des forces départ de secours. Bravo. Bravo. J'avais pas notre événement d'évacuation complète de la piste.
One peculiar aspect of this race, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, up until the 1970 edition, was that the drivers would not start from inside their cars. They would be standing on the other side of the track, their car in front of them, and when the flag was waved to give the start to the race, they would run to their car, strap themselves in, put the seat belts by themselves, and then leave. And in 1970, this was eliminated because it was believed to be excessively dangerous. These are actual images from the race that took place in 1964 that were then edited into the film with the addition of Jean-Louis. And in fact, when you see Jean-Louis, often behind him, you just see the sky. The race starts at 4 p.m. on Saturday, ends at 4 p.m. on the next day, Sunday. You see, this was added later, clearly.
Et la regarderont pendant bien sûr 24 heures. D'ailleurs, je vous vous donne tout de suite rendez-vous ce soir même à 22h pour une autre émission. Et là, je crois qu'à ce moment-là, toujours à Eurovision bien sûr, la course se sera déjà un peu dessinée. À tout à l'heure.
This is Valerie, extreme close-ups, because it's all about her emotions. He has an accident. This is him being taken to the operating room. During the 1960s and through the 70s, a lot of race car drivers died. Dying during a race was not unusual. It is unusual now, but it was quite frequent at that time. The cars were more dangerous. The tracks were not designed the way they are now.
Vous savez que tout à l'heure, il est arrivé un accident au coureur Jean-Louis Duroc, il y a quelques minutes à peine, sur la ligne.
She drives
Accident qui paraît être
to Le Mans, about 100 miles.
Jean-Louis Duroc a été transporté d'urgence au bloc opératoire du circuit du Mans. Il a toujours pas pris connaissance, donc il y a bien entendu au courant de son état, mais pour l'instant, il est sur la table d'opération. C'est tout ce qu'on a bien voulu nous dire.
Again, in the story, you never really hear her. There are practically no lines, just a voiceover. You just see these dramatic moments, but it looks like a film. It's made to look like a film, because really, you cannot imagine this kind of situation outside of a film. Of course, to make this more of a film, she's beautifully, elegantly dressed. She's a beautiful actress. And it's mostly close-ups or extreme close-ups of her, her body, body language. This is a clinic right outside or in the racetrack. Dramatic music. He comes out, and he's still alive, right? But he's in critical conditions. And instead of hearing her, you hear the announcer of the racetrack.
On a enregistré plus de 50% d'abandon, dont bien sûr celui de Jean-Louis Duroc, dont vous avez suivi avec nous le drame. Vous savez qu'il est resté 3 heures sur la table d'opération. Mais ce que vous ne savez pas, c'est qu'alors que Jean-Louis Duroc est toujours au plan commun, un autre drame s'est produit qui le concerne directement. En effet, mais là je vais dire une seconde car je vois Graham.
It's all visual. You just see her reaction, her gestures.
Je vous disais, un drame s'est produit dans les coulisses même de l'hôpital du bloc opératoire. La femme de Jean-Louis Duroc est arrivée cette nuit à l'hôpital et elle a appris de la bouche même du médecin d'état particulièrement alarmant de son mari. Et alors là, il s'est passé une chose effrayante, une chose atroce. Les nerfs de Madame Duroc, déjà très éprouvés par cette course et par l'accident de son mari, ces nerfs ont craqué. Et nous avons appris par une indiscrétion tout à l'heure que Madame Duroc avait mis fin à ses jours. Nous ne savons pas encore dans quelles conditions. Mais la course est continue. Voici à quel point elle a plus de 300 km sur elle.
Now, this is the end of the story, right? Not very realistic. And this is done to emphasize the contrast between the representation of reality, the representation of memories. And please tell me you recognize the trope, the literary trope. Tell me another famous character who commits suicide in a romantic situation where the assumption is he's dead, the other is dead, and therefore I'll terminate my life. Romeo and Juliet. right? So this is the hyper-romantic representation. And again, the idea is, how can Anne compete with this? How can she be the next woman, the next girlfriend, the next wife of Jean-Louis after this? And for him, the problem is, how can he be the next Pierre? When it's so, compared to Pierre, he's so very black and white, not as tall, not as heroic, etc. And the way they both try to be romantic, like in the movies, is for Anne to send that telegram, je vous aime, bravo, and je vous aime. And for him to respond in kind by driving all the way to Paris. And let's look at some of that sequence. What happened? Oh my God. What did I do? What is this? Okay. Give me a second. I don't know what happened. Must have changed the screen inadvertently. Yeah.
Toute la semaine, je ne serai pas là. Je pars faire le rallye de Monte-Carlo. Et dès que je reviens...
Et du rallye, puisque se trouve actuellement au sport d'hiver. Ce n'est donc pas eux qui ont remis les trophées au vainqueur.
So the race is over. And let's see the romantic gesture by Anne and the romantic gesture by him. The winners, he's not there. He hasn't won the race. There he is on TV. She's sitting at home watching TV, right? Nothing more boring than that. And then she thinks, how can I connect with him? Of course, this is an era before cell phones, right? You cannot text, you send a telegram. The telegram is the text of today.
Allô?
The text
Oui,
message.
Monica. Monsieur Jean-Louis Duroc, le cassé. Ah, oui, justement, mais ça, je connais pas l'adresse.
She doesn't even know where he's staying.
Monsieur, c'est un coureur. Il fait le rallye de Monte-Carlo. Ah oui, vous soyez gentil. Oui, c'est ça. Si, le permanent, c'est très bien, oui. Bon, alors...
What is the text?
Bravo.
I saw you on TV.
Vous avez vu, Anne.
Not good enough.
Non, attendez. Bravo. Je vous aime, Anne.
And then this bold gesture to put I love you in a
Oui, c'est ça,
telegram.
oui. Montmartre 1540.
To escalate their relationship from 10 to 19.
Combien de temps ça arrive?
This is Monte Carlo,
Merci.
the Bay of Monte Carlo, Monaco. Fancy shows to celebrate the end of the race. Rich people dancing. And that's the telegram, right? The telegram is reaching Jean-Louis, who's having dinner with other drivers. Now he has a chance to be a romantic hero. the next scene is very telling because you don't really understand this scene if you don't think about the theme of the film. Because he's driving to Paris to see her and tell her, yes, I love you as well. But he stops to fill up the tank of his car, and there is this apparently very odd exchange with the gas station attendant, and you wonder, why have this here? It breaks the romantic mood. And it is intentional, because it is, once again, reminding you that yes, you may try to do a grand romantic gesture as if you were a movie character, but life is not intrinsically romantic. Life will intrude even in your romantic moments. For example, you have to stop for gas and you have to deal with a stupid gas attendant who says, no, give me exact change because otherwise it'll be a problem for me. And then he continues driving, scripting the encounter to make it look like a film. So let's see if we can manage to squeeze in a few minutes of this. So if you understand why this scene is here, you understand the whole film. The guy is asleep, right? So you see that it's going in a different direction, not romantic. The opposite of it. Taking his time, and then being difficult with Jean-Louis. Taking his time.
Alors nous, les centimes, nous les matins, on est obligé de faire les totaux. Alors quand ça tombe sur des centimes, vous comprenez après, il faut laisser les centimes. Non, vous m'en mettez pour 5. Bon, 5 000, d'accord, ça va.
And it's not over. Now the problem is the cigarette.
Oui, mais cigarette.
So this is the realistic anti-romantic moment. And then he starts to romanticize the gesture. You have his voice reflecting on what has happened, what he's going to do. And see how he's trying to script their encounter to be like a movie moment. When he's going to get there, what is he going to do?
Alors je vais chez elle, je sais pas quel étage elle habite, puis je draguer la concierge. Bon. Alors, la concierge me dira, elle n'est pas là, peut-être on ne peut pas monter à cette heure-là.
So you have this dialogue in his head with all the characters.
Je vais faire 5000 km en voiture, 6000, je fais 6000 retour. Je vais faire 6000 km en voiture.
3,000 miles because he has driven in the race and then from Paris, from Monte Carlo to Paris.
Je monte, je sonne. Une fois, deux fois.
How many times do I ring the bell? Right? It's like scripting your proposal, as I said.
Elle est assez longue à se lever. Elle ouvre peut-être pas l'œil. Elle dit qui est là. Alors je lui dis.
What can I say, right?
Je dis.
What is the perfect line?
Je dis aujourd'hui.
No.
Le papa d'entre elles, j'ai dit. Le papa d'entre elles. Oui, ça c'est une bonne importance. Qui est là, le papa d'entre elles?
Because the reference to the kid is a reference to a longer kind of commitment than becoming a family, one family.
On se trouve face à face. Alors elle est bien sûr elle est gênée.
she's giving her emotions, etc. And of course, I'll stop. Perhaps I'll say a few things about Nomadland and show you a scene from it on Monday. Thank you for your patience. Let me know if I can do anything to help you. Keep in mind, this week, Friday, by the end of the day, viewing notes on A Man and a Woman.